Welcome to the Check Your Head podcast, the podcast where notable musicians and experts come and share their stories and solutions for mental health and wellness. I'm your host, Mari Fong, a music journalist and life coach for musicians, and today I'm starting with celebrations for the month of June. We are celebrating Juneteenth, a day that represents the end of slavery, which has officially become a national holiday on June 19th. And we're also celebrating Pride Month in June, where we celebrate our friends in the LGBTQ community. Another important milestone to celebrate is the coronavirus, which has gotten to a new low in the U.S. due to people getting vaccinated. So to protect yourself from this potentially deadly virus, I encourage you to get vaccinated so life can return for us all. Next, a shout out to Chicano Batman, a band who is having a virtual benefit concert on June 30th for our friends at Sweet Relief Musicians Fund. So if you'd like to celebrate by attending this special show, visit ChicanoBatman.com or sweetrelief.org to purchase your tickets. Now to our featured guests. Today we have a rock god, the co-founder of a hair metal band started in 1982, a band who's still rocking out today, having sold 14 million albums and counting. This band famously toured with the likes of Def Leppard, Motley Crue, and Van Halen, and are still going strong with a tour this year with Leonard Skinner. Their last album dropped in 2020, entitled Five Man London Jam, best known for their songs like Love Song, Modern Day Cowboy, and their cover of the song Signs. Today we have the great bass player and keyboardist Brian Wheat of Tesla. Brian recently published an autobiography called Son of a Milkman, My Crazy Life with Tesla. Not only does Brian share his wild rock star life, but also his struggles with panic attacks, bulimia, depression, and addictions, and his practical solutions for recovery in the book and on today's episode. Next, our featured expert is a mental health advocate, speaker, educator, and author of the book, Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps. Mental health expert Karl Shallowhorn talks to us today about how he tackled his own mood disorder and addictions and how you can too. But first, let's hear Brian Wheat of Tesla share his story. When Tesla started to rise in fame, you started to have anxiety and panic attacks. How did you deal with those panic attacks when you were on tour?
Well, it didn't really happen until we were making Psychotic Supper and I was in the studio. I wasn't on tour when they first came along. I've had some since then on tour, but I've learned how to control it and how to recognize it and deal with it. But when they first started coming out, we were in the rehearsal studio working on Psychotic Supper. And one night I went to rehearsal. We were in pre-production. And I threw up all over the place and started freaking out. And Steve Thompson took me outside, our producer, and he said, look, when we get to New York next week, my brother's a doctor at the hospital. We'll have him check you out and see what's going on. And that's when I was diagnosed with the anxiety disorder.
And you mentioned you didn't want to take medication for the anxiety or the panic attacks?
Yeah, because I was already taking drugs recreationally, pills, and I didn't want to get more pills. So I decided to go the psychiatry route, even though I didn't really believe in psychiatry at the time.
Through your therapy, what things did you learn to help deal with those panic attacks?
Just to recognize that what it was and tell yourself that you were in control, not it. And you play these mind games with yourself to talk yourself off the ledge, so to speak. Some breathing, deep breathing always helps.
What were some of the drugs that you were taking at that time? Because I do remember you saying that Psychotic Supper is when a lot of the band members were in the midst of drugs and alcohol.
Oh, definitely. And Jeff smacked Tommy around a few times, and that was definitely over drugs. So, yeah, sometimes it was drugs and alcohol, and sometimes it was just we got on each other's nerves. And that's what brothers do. Siblings fight with each other. So we're no different. We're just human.
I couldn't keep up with all the different members and the drugs that were going on there. What were some of your favorite drugs that you were taking at the time?
I liked cocaine and ecstasy. Those were the ones I got really into in the later part of Tesla before we broke up. But before that, I wasn't into anything. I just used to drink. So,
Yeah, I found that really interesting is that when the other members were going through their struggles, you were pretty clean, but it was only till later that you got into that. So, what was it that I guess inspired you to start doing more drugs and alcohol at that time?
well, because they were. So I wanted to connect with them. I went, well, let me see what this is all about.
Okay, so it was more curiosity.
Well, in the beginning, but then you liked it. I mean, have you ever done drugs?
Yeah, I have.
Did you like them?
There were some drugs that I did enjoy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's just human nature. You do it out of curiosity and then you like them. And then you either fucking figure a way to get outgrow them or you end up paying the piper. There's the story doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
I liked benzos, Valium. I was into that. Quaalude. You could still get Quaalude back then, but not a lot, but more than I was used to. Not like I got later in life with cocaine and ecstasy. I mean, I was full on coke freak. So I was just dabbling with it and I didn't want to take more pills. Not really a pill kind of guy. Yeah.
When did it get to a point where you felt like you really needed to do something about your cocaine or your alcohol use?
Well, it was when Tesla finally broke up and I hooked up with my wife, Monique. She said, look, I won't date you if you're high. So I said, okay, I can quit. I don't need to take the drugs. So I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, like that.
Really, just like that. So
yeah, I'm one of those guys that can do that on some things. I wish I could stop some of the other things I start, but with the drugs, I just walked away from them. I went, I don't need them, and stopped.
Well, that's really noble of you to be able to do that, because not everyone could do that. But I guess when you have,
not everyone can do that. I was able to do that. I was able to stop drinking. Didn't really bother me. I wish I could stop eating, but that's a little bit harder.
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of determination and a lot of restraint. And I'm glad you brought that up because there was a point in your life where you said you were a big guy and you felt pressured to lose weight for the image of the band. And you said you were borderline bulimic.
Yeah, for a few years. Yeah, I was.
Yeah, so can you tell me about that time in your life and what was going through your head?
What was going through my head was we were at the height of our career and I'm trying to stay as thin as I can. And I got obsessed with my weight so much that I used to carry a scale around in a suitcase. When I went on the road, and if I started to put on weight, I would stick my fingers down my throat to throw up, to what I had eaten. If I was like, oh, no, I'm 5 pounds over. And that was kind of this dangerous tightroad I was on for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good amount of time. I mean, did you have any physical repercussions?
Not really.
That?
Not really, no. Maybe I do now. I don't know. But at the time, no, I didn't have any problems.
So in that case, did you also do the same thing? You just came to a point where you decided to stop doing that, or was there an incident?
No, just one day the band had broken up and I was off tour and maybe I didn't feel as much pressure and I just stopped. And then right about that time, then that's when the autoimmune thing kicked in. And then they start putting me on prednisone. And I mean, prednisone's going to put weight on you no matter what the fuck you do. So then I've struggled with that for the last 15 years. My weight going up and down, up and down, up and down because of the medication and the Crohn's disease, the colitis and the Crohn's. And the only way they can really combat it is with steroids, prednisone. And that's really bad for you.
Mm.
You know, it might take care of the colitis, but it does all this other shit to your body.
You do mention your autoimmune disease throughout the book and how it's affected you physically, but sometimes autoimmune diseases can also affect you mentally and physically. Because you talk about depression during the book. There's one specific page where you really get into talking about it. Can you tell me about your experience with that?
Well, I've had it from time to time, but I think you're probably talking about when I was in Canada. And I had said in the book that I always could never understand why, these guys killed themselves from depression. I mean, I felt bad for them, but I could never understand how it could get so bad you would take your own life. And there was a point when I was in Canada that I had that kind of depression. Now, I'm not saying I contemplated suicide because I didn't, but it was so intense and so overwhelming. At that point, I said to myself, okay, I get it. I see how these guys just couldn't put up with this anymore, or how someone couldn't put up with this anymore. And it was a pretty dark place.
What was going on in your life at the time? Was it something that just came out of the blue, or was it precipitated by something else?
At the top of my game, man. I was on tour with Def Leppard in Canada. Everything was going great. I don't know what the hell happened.
Mm. And then when did things start turning around with the depression?
About 6 months later.
Okay.
3-4 months later. But I'm pretty sure that the depression was brought on because I tried getting off my anti-anxiety medicine, because I went through this period where I didn't want to take medicine anymore. I was like, I don't want to take the pills. I feel fine. So it took about 2.5, 3 months to wean off this Paxil stuff. And I was fine for about 3 or 4 months. And then this depression kicked in out of nowhere. And I finally had to go back on Paxil, and it took care of it. So I think the main thing is if you have to take medication for depression, don't not take it. Mm-hmm. Take the medicine. It's there for a reason. Don't feel like you're weak or inadequate or any of that shit. Take the fucking medicine.
Well, I'm glad that you shared that, because oftentimes that does happen. You feel like you're going through a chapter in your life or an episode in your life, and that you don't need the medication anymore. And then people will do exactly what you do, which is wean off, and then find that they're in trouble again. So
yeah, that's what happens. And then it takes a while to get the medicine back into your system.
Right. It takes some time. So that's also kind of an unstable time, having to wait for the medication to kick back in. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I think is really important to know is some of the thoughts that go through your head when you're deeply depressed. Was there anything that you thought of at the time that really scared you or made you feel like, wow, this is really unusual for me to think this way?
Well, that freaked me out because I never felt that way, and that itself had me really anxious and uptight. The fact that I wasn't feeling normal. It's just kind of like a cat chasing its tail. You know what I mean?
You said you didn't feel normal. How would you describe that? I mean,
well, when your body's not feeling right or your mind doesn't feel right, I mean, you're always in tune with your body and what's going on. You can tell. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't feel right. Something was off. Mentally, emotionally, it was off. And it was freaking me out. Because like I said, there wasn't nothing really tragic or anything or to have me upset. It was just normal business as usual.
Yeah, when we're depressed or when we're anxious, sometimes we have these thoughts, like, where did that come from? And it really does scare us. You said that at first you didn't believe in psychiatry. And there are a lot of people that are just like, I don't want to go to counseling. But what was it that it really gave you? What did you receive from counseling and therapy?
Well, it made me look at myself and recognize why I was the way I was. And when they do that regression therapy and take you through your childhood and all that stuff, Some people say, oh, it's a bunch of bullshit, but it isn't. Once you look at your childhood, you can figure out the lineage to why you may have problems later in your life. And that's what I got out of it.
So what did you discover about your upbringing that might have caused some issues in the future?
Well, I didn't have a dad. I was with my mom a lot. She had some mental problems. She had some nervous breakdowns I witnessed. I had to grow up at a very early age to take care of her. That stuff all puts this kind of shit on you. You know, it's not like I was abused or sexually molested or anything like that. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case, but, you know, it's just other shit that when you're a kid, it's too much for you.
Well, that is tough for a child to have to deal with a parent that needs to be parented because they're suffering from mental issues. And oftentimes,
she was suffering from anxiety and depression herself. She just didn't know it. Back then, she had her first nervous breakdown when I was like 3 or 4. I'm talking 1966, 67. You know, they didn't treat anxiety like they do now. They put you in a psych ward and gave you shock treatments. Mm-hmm. And that's the generation she came from. She probably was a manic depressive. Mm-hmm. They thought that everyone was crazy back then, hysterical or whatever the fuck they called it. Saw that weird voodoo witch shit back in those days.
Right. Not a whole lot of solid medication or solid therapies that people referred to. So she never really was able to get any help for that. Or did she eventually?
No. But later in her life, they put her on these pills. And she was the best I'd ever saw her. So they finally figured it out. But she was, you know, close to 80 years old. She was like 77 years old, and she died 4 years later.
I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes things like that can get passed down. And it's always good to know your family history. And I wanted to get back to when you started to get into drugs, because oftentimes drugs can be tied to mental health issues. And there was a point where the cocaine got really bad and you overdosed. What was happening then, and how did you survive that?
What was happening was I just got too high one night. You know, you like something. If I like a pizza, I'll eat the whole pizza. So I liked the cocaine, so I snorted all of it and mixed that with a big bottle of red wine, and it wasn't good. It was not pretty. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. How I survived it was my poor mom was there at the house, and I called a friend of mine who was in a sober program, told him what I did, and he came and sat with me all night. And then he tried to get me to go into a 28-day program and stuff, but I had to go on tour the next week, so that ain't going to happen. I'll just go on tour, and when I get home, I promise I'll do it. And when I got home, we had broken up. The band had broken up, so that's when I met my wife, and she's the one that said, look, you know, I can't date you if you're high all the time. So then I just stopped. I didn't need a 28-day program. I just stopped. Mm-hmm. You know, thank God I met her. Who knows? I might have wind up dead.
Well, your story kind of reminds me of Gilby Clarke. I also interviewed Gilby Clarke, and he said that there's all kinds of things that happen when you're in a band. But when he met his wife, it was the same kind of a thing where she, you know, led a much healthier life and wanted to take care of him. And I'm sure your wife feels the same way about you.
Yeah, well, no one wants to feel like shit. And sometimes you just don't know how to stop so you don't have to feel like shit. You know, a lot of things you do, you self-inflict. But I'm a believer that no one wants to feel like shit. So if you can just get off the track for a second, you can get off the merry-go-round, hopefully. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, your band, Tesla, toured so much, and there were changes in your success. And I would think that fame is also kind of like an addiction. Did you feel that the fame also got to the heads of a lot of the people? in the band?
Yeah, it does to everybody. You can't help it. I mean, it's hard to be young and successful and not be affected by it. It happens. I think it happens to everybody. And you just got to hope that you're lucky enough that you come out the other side of it and come back to some sense of normality and realize that it's just your job and this is what you do and you ain't special or better than anyone else. It's just a gift you got that's what you do. And someone else does something else really cool. We all have something we're good at. But when you're young, it's hard not to get caught up in the hype and believe you're cool as fuck. So it happens. It happened to me, and it happened to lots of guys I know. And fortunately, I don't trip on it anymore. It's just like, okay, that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
You were in Soul Motor also.
Mm-hmm.
So when you started that, every band starts off playing smaller venues and building their audience. How was that like when you were playing to stadiums of people with Tesla and then having to transition and work a new fan base?
It was a difficult transition. I call it paying back taxes because it happened for Tesla fairly quick. Tesla didn't have to spend 4 or 5 years developing a fan base. It happened really quick. And with Soul Motor, we're still trying to develop a fan base. So it's back taxes for having it so quickly in Tesla. It's just the way God planned it. But it can be tough sometimes when you're playing to 12 people. When you're used to paying to 10,000.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but it builds character as well.
Well, you mentioned your friend Ross Halfin, the photographer, and he mentioned that you flew out to England to be with him when he was in a bad place in his life and really considers you a good friend. Can you tell me how that experience was for you to take action when your friend was in emotional pain?
It's just how I am. I like to help my friends. If you're my friend for life. And I could see he was hurting and he needed someone. So we went. And I would hope he would do the same for me. It's just what you do sometimes for your friends.
Yeah, I think sometimes just spending time, even next to your friend, you might not even be doing anything special. Just showing that you care can really make a difference when someone is not in a good place for whatever reasons. And we all go through those times in our lives. Part of the podcast is about solutions. And you mentioned something in your book called the HCG diet. What is that?
That is this diet that you take these shots. And I think it's the pregnant woman's hormone or something when she's pregnant. And you shoot them into your belly. And it allows you to live on very low calories. Because it's like when a woman's pregnant, if she doesn't eat right, her body produces a hormone so the baby doesn't starve. So that's the theory behind it. And I went on that one time and I lost a considerable amount of weight. But I was eating like 400 calories a day.
That's not much.
No, it's not much at all. But it did work at the time. This last year's been fucked because COVID and you don't know if you're ever going to play again. And then you get depressed and then you say, fuck it, give me a cheeseburger. I don't got to go on concert because when you have to go on stage, you have to go on stage, you're going to not eat as much as you would like to because you go, I got to keep my image together. You know what I mean? And I tell you, sitting around on my ass for a year with this COVID thing has been, I probably put on 30 pounds. So now I got to take them off. It gets harder and harder as you get older and older.
Well, the thing about Tesla that I'm just so impressed with is that you have been going for decades. I mean, you put out Shock in 2019.
Yeah.
And then you put out the 5-man London Jam, Live from Abbey Road. That came out in March of 2020. How have you been surviving this pandemic as a working musician?
I'm unemployed. Okay. I'm not working. There's no work. There's no money coming in. Living off my bank account. So that's how. The government, they don't give a fuck about the musicians. You know, they don't even send us a stimulus check. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is.
Well, you're talking about so many different things, panic attacks and anxiety and going through depression. How would you describe your mental and physical health today?
Mentally, I'm okay. I'm pretty sound. Physically, I'm a bit pudgy, and I got to get my shit together. And, you know, I've got this hernia that I'm dealing with. But mentally, I'm okay. Physically, I'll be all right. I just got to fix this hernia so I can start training again and watch what I'm eating and get back in shape. Hopefully, we'll come and play this summer.
Well, the vaccine is out, and hopefully live music will come back, because as a fan, I mean, I know I so miss that. That's like my favorite thing. And I would love to see you guys live and out there rocking out.
Well, we're going to try as soon as we can.
What would you like to say to your fellow musicians to encourage them to get mental help? You know, any kind of help when it's needed.
Don't be embarrassed. Don't feel ashamed. You're not weak. Don't let someone make you feel inferior. If you feel bad, talk to somebody about it. It doesn't make you less of a person. If anything, it makes you a bigger person. That's what I would tell them.
I really appreciated the fact that in your book you included the suicide prevention line and the crisis text line, because that's something that people can do anonymously.
Yeah.
You know, and one more thing, you mentioned that social media can sometimes be hurtful to your mental health. Can you?
Fuck yeah, it can be.
Yeah, can you tell me how social media has affected you negatively?
Well, you know, look, man, you do what I do. People are always taking pictures of you, right? And, you know, I don't put a disclaimer out there. Look, I suffer from an anxiety disorder that makes me have to go on prednisone sometimes 2 and 3 times a year, and my weight goes up and down. And when some guy in fucking South America goes, look at that fat motherfucker, you ought to go on a diet or get on a treadmill, but you pumped up on steroids and were able to go play the tour, it fucks with your head. Because people can say whatever they want, sit behind their fucking computer and judge and talk shit about anybody. So I don't want people to blow smoke up my ass, but I don't think being vicious to somebody is really quite the answer either. You know, I don't need someone to tell me I'm great, okay? But to pick on people when you don't even know what they may be going through in their life, it's just being an asshole. And that's what you get. You get a free ticket to do that with social media. You can talk shit about anybody. You know, I feel bad when they talk about Vince Neil and talk all kinds of shit about him or whoever. It's just like, you know what, if you ain't got nothing good to say, go to another page or go look at porno, whatever the fuck you need to do, man. You don't need to spew negativity. It doesn't help anybody. But hey, it's America. Freedom of speech, right?
Well, is there anything else that you would like to say about Tesla, about Soul Motor?
Yeah, we're the greatest band in the world.
Well, you sold 14 million albums and counting, so that is something to really be proud of.
Tesla is my proudest thing in life. We've managed to persevere a lot of shit, and we're still there. We're still playing. We still sound really good. And that makes me really proud. And we do a lot of it on our own these days. So, yeah, it's quite a thing.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. And thank you so much for the music.
Oh, you're
so
welcome.
Many decades of music. Next up, we have an authority on mental health education and a sought-after speaker and coach, Karl Shallowhorn, who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and fell into his own addictions earlier in life. Having found stability through the 12-step program, he has since authored a number of books, his last one entitled Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps. Now let's hear expert Karl Shallowhorn share his knowledge and his advice. Brian Wheat of Tesla. He mentioned in his interview that his mother might have had manic depression, which is now referred to as bipolar. And I wanted to start with your own mental health journey because I know that you've been diagnosed with bipolar 1 and you also had an addiction. But what solutions did you find that worked for you for bipolar to allow you to live a better life?
For me, it was more, I won't say trial and error, but it was a long time ago. I had my first episode in 1981. I was a college freshman and I'd gone through in and out of hospitals and using drugs, and I wasn't the best patient around for a while. But the first thing I did do was stop using. That got the ball rolling to more stability in my life. And so I went to a 12-step program, which I'm still involved with today. And so I went to this 12-step program and I realized that I could have a life without using drugs. And then on top of that, I began to take the medication I was prescribed as prescribed properly, which I wasn't always doing before. And from there, I really began to just develop a really good support system. I mean, first, my parents were very helpful. And then I ended up meeting my wife a few years into recovery. And from there, my friends in the program and things just evolved. And then I got into exercise also. I realized it was something I had to do to take care of my overall well-being. So it's a bunch of things, but overall, it's a combination of things that have allowed me to stay free of any manic episode since 1995.
Wow, that's really great to hear. I love to hear the other side, like after somebody has found the right solutions, because I know it's a long journey. I mean, I've had my experiences with depression and anxiety, and it takes a while to find out what is going to work for you, your lifestyle, your DNA, and all of these other things. One thing that I was interested in is you talked about the people that are around you, your wife, your family, your support system. You know, because Brian Wheat, he said his life changed dramatically when he met his wife, who said she was not going to date somebody who was high all the time. So Brian stopped. From your experience, what has been some of the key motivators for people to get help?
I think many times it is those relationships, like you just said, Mari. Sometimes it comes down to someone saying either the drugs or me, take your pick. Now, it doesn't always work out, but a lot of times it's like that wake-up call, or sometimes they say it's hitting bottom that does it. It could be being arrested. It could be the potential of losing a job or even losing a gig in a band. But a lot of times it's that jarring experience. You have that simple aha moment. So let me tell you, for me, Mari, I remember vividly sitting in my counselor's office. I was using at the time, I was still dabbling here and there, and I was still somewhat unstable. And my counselor said to me, he said, Karl, I'm going to give you 3 choices. Either you go to rehab, you go to an NA meeting, or you end up back in the hospital. And I sat there and I thought about it for a second. And I was working in a recording studio. That was actually my first job out of college, was at a recording studio. And I said, I don't want to go, I don't want to tell my boss I have a drug problem. And then I said to myself, definitely don't want to go back to the hospital. So I took the path of least resistance, as they say, and I said, well, I'll go to the NA meeting. But little did I know, when I went 2 days later, it literally changed my life. I walked in, and so that was it. And so sometimes it's someone just making you look at yourself and what you're doing and make you realize that if you don't make a change, it's not going to be good.
Right. One thing I thought was really interesting is that you also talk on healthy relationships, which really is a great foundation, not only for mental health, but for life. And I'm curious on what you tell loving partners, families, when they're working with somebody that has either a mental health issue or addiction.
One of the first words I always think of is empathy. And it's really hard sometimes to be empathetic when your loved one is engaging in behavior or, say, acting in a way that makes the relationship difficult. But I always encourage family members to try the best they can to have patience, to understand that certainly no one wants a mental illness. No one wants to have a drug addiction. We can't necessarily blame the individual, despite the fact that it might seem like what they're doing is their fault. But we know that these are brain diseases and they are physiological in nature. So we have to approach it from the perspective of looking at someone who's ill. And so when you look at it that way, then you can be maybe a little bit more empathetic. Doesn't mean that you give a person a pass. But maybe you're willing to say, okay, I'll work with you on this. I'll maybe give you a little more time or go with you to your therapist appointment for the first time. But sometimes we do know, Mari, that unfortunately people do burn bridges too. And that's where those relationships are difficult to repair. But more often than anything, early on, it's important that early intervention is key. So if a person is exhibiting a problem, you want to get at it as early as possible, like any other illness, whether it's cancer, heart disease, you name it. You want to intervene early. So that's another big thing too, is try to attack the problem early.
Okay. Now, one thing that you have in common with a lot of people that come on the podcast is that music has been your sanctuary, especially during your mental health issues. And I'm wondering for you, what is it about music that has really helped you through those tough times?
Oh my gosh, Mari. As the old saying goes, let me count the ways. Music for me is therapy. It's just part of my DNA. It soothes me. It makes me feel. There was only one time in my life that I recall when I listened to music, I didn't get anything out of it. And that was when I was having a major depressive episode as part of bipolar many years ago. But I've always felt music. I don't just hear it, I feel it. And I have music for every way I feel. But music for me transcends my own life experience. It's been with me through the very difficult times. I can go back to any period in my life and remember a song that got me through it. One song in particular in my really tough days was a song by the English group Matt Johnson. The song is This Is the Day. And I remember listening to that album, Soul Mining. That whole album, Soul Mining, that was the soundtrack of my life in 1983. Those songs I just resonated with that. So another real quick story was when my father died, I would go and visit him in the nursing home and play music for him when he was dying. And I played John Coltrane, Coltrane Plays the Blues. And that was the last album that was playing when he took his last breath. Very sacred moment. It's like the soundtrack of my life. That's really what it comes down to.
Right. All the emotion behind it, the lyrics. And I'm not sure if you are a musician yourself, if you've tried playing guitar or keyboards or whatever, but I also know once you get into playing, everything drops away. It's a wonderful escape that makes us feel so good. And we're in the now, we're focused on just that. And what a great thing to focus on when things might feel like they're falling apart around you. Brian, his story involved a lot of different kinds of addiction. He talked about cocaine, alcohol use. He talked about bulimia, which is sort of like an addiction to losing weight. Is there truth behind the term having an addictive personality? What do you think about that term, having an addictive personality?
It's interesting you say it that way because I believe that, in a sense, that is true. Because addictions are typically surrounding primarily behaviors, but also has to do with thoughts. But usually there's some type of behavior behind it. And oftentimes, when you have someone who is addicted to something, a behavior or a substance, for instance, their personality many times will match their usage, or it will mirror, what they're doing. Or it'll amplify what they're experiencing. For instance, some people who experience depression need some type of a stimulant, for instance, to feel better. Like Brian was talking about using cocaine, like to really get up. But then again, when you're engaging in that use, it takes you to a place where it does distort your personality because it's not the real you. And I think, unfortunately, when a person is caught up in their addiction, it can take them to the place where perhaps they're not acting or thinking the way they typically would when they wouldn't be using that substance or that behavior.
Yeah, that's the thing about self-medicating, which happens a lot. We grab what we think is going to work instead of making a phone call to a therapist or trying something else. If somebody is self-medicating at a level where it's been going on for a long time, and as somebody who did that, what do you say to try to persuade them just to try a different way?
That's a good question, Mari, because that is one that I think many people have struggled with for ages. If it were that simple, then we wouldn't have people with addiction problems. But I will say this, though, there are techniques, there are tools that people can use in order to help themselves overcome their addictions. Certainly, professional therapy, there's a lot to be said for it. And there are certain techniques in therapy. One is called motivational interviewing, which therapists use to help someone be more self-directed in their recovery, self-directed in their decision-making as to how they tackle this problem. Because when a person is actively addicted to something, they may feel there's no problem. That's the pre-contemplation stage. But then the contemplation stage is when they go into this feeling of, yeah, I'm using cocaine. I like how it makes me feel, but I also realize that my band members are really disgusted with me when I can't perform. And then the preparation stage is when you decide, okay, I'm going to put it down. I'm going to stop at a certain date. And then the action stage is when you decide to fully stop. And then the maintenance stage is when you are engaging in the proactive behaviors and so forth. So the stage of change model follows motivational interviewing, where you're just giving that person the opportunity to say, I'm making a decision here. Sometimes when people are confronted with their addictions by others, those that are trying to help are trying to give advice or tell the person what to do. When more than anything, individuals need the opportunity to know that they can be empowered to make the change. They may need help, but they need to feel a sense of control over what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Talking about mental health issues and drug use and abuse, some people have been doing this for so long that it's become part of their self-image. Maybe drinking is associated with socializing with other band members. There's all kinds of ties to drugs and alcohol to their lifestyle. What kind of change needs to happen? Because I would think that you would need to have a change also in your self-image if you're going to change that part of your life. Is that where therapy comes in?
Yeah. But also it comes down to loving yourself, right? I mean, the whole idea of, would you treat someone else like you're treating yourself? Think about it this way, Mari. When a person is engaging in a behavior like you're describing, which is addictive in nature, which are potentially life-threatening, whether it be in the short term or the long term, they're killing themselves. And you have to think about it this way. Think to yourself, what I'm doing here is literally killing me. Why would I want to do that? Do I love myself enough to stop? And sometimes when faced with that question, people can come to the realization that I think I need to do something about this. And I've seen it in my own life. I've seen people I know close to me who have made that decision. And it was more a matter of life-saving, because if they didn't, then they'd be putting, their health at risk. But it's hard, though, when you're surrounded by other people who are engaging in these behaviors. It's hard to get away from that, whether it be you're a musician or a lot of times in the music industry or any, restaurant work, even same thing. There's people who work in restaurants. These environments where people are high stress and around it so much that being able to just separate yourself from it is difficult. But there are ways to safely do that. And it's being done all the time. We know that there are many musicians who found their way, whether it be through 12-step programs or other recovery models, who've been able to successfully stop their use and live healthy lives.
Well, you said a key thing, which is loving yourself. And I do believe that the core of a lot of issues really kind of boils down to loving yourself and wanting to take care of yourself. I mean, was that an issue in your situation, or did you find that as soon as you started having symptoms and realizing that something wasn't quite right, that you went immediately to start to try to find your solutions?
It's interesting you say that because, Amari, when I had that session with the therapist I described, my decision was based on fear more than anything. Fear of the what ifs. If I don't change, then my life is, and I'll tell you, Mary, there's a local institution here in Buffalo, which is still open. It's called the Buffalo Psychiatric Center. And I'd been in there twice, 20, 21 years old, with men who were literally older, some of whom were literally criminally insane. I kid you not. And here I'm this kid thinking to myself, is this my future? So yeah, part of it was love myself enough to say I need to make a change, but also there's that fear of if I don't change, then this is what I'm looking at. And I may not die physically, but mentally, emotionally, I'll be gone.
Mm-hmm. You said the last time you had an episode was 1995?
Yes.
And since then, I suspect that you've, been in control and disciplined. How difficult has that been for you to be, especially with your addiction, to be in control and disciplined with your mental health and your addiction recovery?
It's not easy. It's not easy. Even now, every day, it's work. And one of the things I still deal with now is around sleep. And one of the things that's well known is that people with bipolar disorder, sleep is a must. You got to get sleep. When you lose sleep, that's not good. So for me, I have to still be careful of my sleep. And also, I'm still in therapy. I still have a psychiatrist, and I use my supports. So I'm doing a lot of those things that I did since 1995. I still do today. And it's sort of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I kind of got the recipe, I'll call it that way, for what works for me. And I'm not going to deviate from that. And I've had some pretty close calls over the years. It hasn't been easy. I've had some really rough patches. But fortunately, with a good, loving support system like my wife, who has been essential, she called me out just last year. When I was getting a little hypomanic, she said, you seem like you need to check in with your counselor, with your psychiatrist, which I did. And we kind of maybe averted something there. So it's a number of things, but it takes a lot of work. And I don't wish these illnesses on anybody. I swear, not even on my worst enemy, because it can be torturous for a lot of people.
Now, the medication that you're on, has that changed throughout the years, or has that been pretty good for you throughout that time? The same medication?
That's a really good question, too, because it took me a number of years to find out what worked. Mm-hmm. Now, when I had my first episode in 1981, there were only what we call them first-generation antipsychotics around. There's no Abilify, Latuda. None of that stuff was around. This is before all that. So you had lithium for bipolar disorder. I mean, that was about it. And they still use lithium today, but more often there's other drugs. And then I took another medication called Mellaril, which is in the same classification as Thorazine. So I took those medications for a long time. I did develop some health complications from lithium, though, over time.
And what was that?
I'll just be honest. I had some kidney issues, lithium toxicity. So I had to change my medication to another mood stabilizer called Depakote. Mm-hmm. And I've been taking Depakote now for 9 years. My kidneys have been stabilized. I see a nephrologist because I've thought about it, and I realized that at the time I had no choice. And if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have done it the same way. I mean, I had to get my mind. Without my mind, I can't do anything. For anybody who takes any medication now, do your research. We know, there was no internet in 1981, right? A lot of people can have the advantage of being able to do their research now. Do your research, ask questions, and that's what I encourage people to do as well.
Yeah, and understand that there's going to be a trial and error period.
Absolutely.
And that things normally don't work the first time around, and if it does, you're really lucky.
Absolutely.
But now there is like a DNA test that will show what kind of medications that you are more likely to have work. And I didn't believe it at the time. But I actually took the test, and this was after I finally found my solutions. And I found that the medications that I had tried didn't work well with my body. And the ones that eventually did work were on the list that said these medications work best, according to your DNA. And I was really surprised by that. And it's something that could possibly reduce the time for that trial and error.
Mhm.
So I have that on my website. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, though,
Okay.
as far as the name of the test. But one thing that I was really interested in is you are a mental health first aid instructor.
Yes.
And can you tell me more about that?
Well, Mental Health First Aid is a program that was developed in 2001 in Australia by a woman who was a nurse and I believe another practitioner. It came to the United States in 2008 by the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, which is their new name, and the states of Maryland, Missouri. What it is, it's a certification program. So think about CPR, but for mental health. What it does is it educates participants in knowing what to look for. It teaches about signs and symptoms of mental illnesses. It reduces the stigma. It helps raise awareness. It gives individuals tools. There's a 5-step action plan that you learn to help someone who's in a crisis. So you learn about anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, substance use. There's videos in the training. There's interactive exercises. So it's an 8-hour training. It's pretty intensive. But I'll tell you, I've now taught probably close to 1,800 people, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly resounding positively that people enjoy the training and what they get out of it. And it's for anybody. It's not for a clinician. Anybody can take the training. If you go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org and you can search for a class, many of them are being offered for free through grants. A lot of them are now even being offered virtually. Because if someone wants to take the class, you go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org, you can find stuff and contact an instructor, and that's a great way to learn how to help someone who might be in need.
Well, one thing I read was that you spoke to a group of police officers, and they said they approach people in a much different way because oftentimes criminals can have mental health issues or people that are acting, their behavior is off and they need to understand or maybe have more empathy when they approach that person. That really does make a difference. So thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, yeah. And our law enforcement community, I think, unfortunately, are in a tough bind. We know that. They have a really hard job. But if they're equipped with the tools to know how to respond to someone with a mental crisis, everyone is better off.
One thing I think is really important is when you look back, when you were in the depths of your mood disorder and also with addiction versus your life today, can you tell me how you feel about how your life has changed and all the benefits that come with that?
Oh, my God, Mari. So in my 12-step program, one of the things we say is, you can have a life beyond your wildest dreams. Now, we also say that the only promise we have is freedom from active addiction. But you can still live a life beyond your wildest dreams. And my life is far beyond my wildest dreams. I'm employed. That was my first dream, was just to have a job. I'm married. My wife and I will have been married this summer for 27 years.
Wow.
I have 2 adult daughters who are wonderful young women who don't have addiction problems. Thank God. I'm able to. I have a podcast, as you know, that of my own. I train people, I educate people. I do things that at one time in my life were virtually impossible because of where I was at mentally, emotionally. So I'm a believer in faith. I believe that there's a creator, higher power, as we say, that perhaps I'm doing the work that I'm intended to do. But I also very, very fortunate, and then there's also another saying we have: we only keep what we have by giving it away. And I feel strongly that the only way that I maintain my recovery is by helping others, and that's what I try to do every day.
Thank you so much for being a mental health advocate and using your experience to better other people's lives and giving them hope, which I think really is the most important thing, because sometimes when you're at the bottom and you just can't feel a thing because you just don't care anymore and you're exhausted, just that little sliver of hope to know that somebody else was able to come up from that means everything, and that little ounce of care that somebody can give, can mean everything. But Karl Shallowhorn, is there anything else that you would like to say about mental health or addiction?
The last thing I'll say, what you just talked about with hope, the one thing I always say is recovery is possible. And recovery looks different for everyone, but it's always possible to go beyond where you think you can go. And it takes a lot of work, but it is so worth it. And you can have a life that you never thought you could have before, even if it means just not having to deal with some of the symptoms you might be experiencing. But the bottom line is there's a way to get better. And as far as I'm concerned, we're never fully recovered. I will never be fully recovered. That's why I always have to continually work on what I'm doing. But I would never have it any other way.
Yes, there's a lot of great satisfaction in knowing that you're helping others. And your story is something that could be used for good, make people take the right steps. So thank you so much, Karl.
Thank you, Mari. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. A big thank you to our musical guest, Brian Wheat of Tesla, and our mental health expert, Karl Shallowhorn. For more information on Tesla and Brian Wheat, visit teslatheband.com and look out for Tesla on tour starting August 6th of 2021. Follow Tesla and Brian on their socials at Tesla Band and Brian Wheat at Brian Wheat Tesla and at Brian Wheat. For more information on Karl Shallowhorn, visit shallowhornconsulting.com and follow Karl on his socials at Shallowhorn Consulting. So until next time, be brave, ask for help, and be persistent in finding the mental help that you need. Check Your Head podcast is kindly supported and partnered with Sweet Relief Musicians Fund, DBSA San Gabriel Valley, Earshot Media, and Lemon Tree Studios in Los Angeles. Visit checkyourheadpodcast.com, where we have over 100 solutions for mental help. Be our friends on social media at Check Your Head Podcast. Watch us on YouTube and support us with a kind donation on checkyourheadpodcast.com. Check Your Head Podcast is sponsored by a 501c3 nonprofit, with all donations being tax deductible. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.